Welcome, everybody, to the Movie Bears podcast midday, well, maybe mid morning, wherever you are. Movie Babble break, part of aGliff 33 Prism. My name is Jim Pugliafico, one of the hosts of the Movie Bears podcast. And we are a group of husky, hairy, huggable homos, as we like to call ourselves, who love talking about film. And today I'm joined by one of my co hosts, Will Lindis. Hey, Will.
Hey, Jim. Good morning and good morning, aGliff. I'm so excited to have all of you here with us. We've got some really amazing guests on deck for today's mid-morning movie babble break. So first up, we do have from the film Sparks, Netta Shaler. From Vincy, we have, Sophia Shek and Vincy. And from The Lonely Prince, we have brothers and co-directors and co-writers Shivin and Sonny Grover.
Hello. Hey, guys.
Hey, welcome, everybody. As Will said, we've got some really great questions for the filmmakers. So let's dive in. And also, for those watching live, feel free to ask any questions that you have. We'll look for those and try to get some of those in as we see them come up. But up first today is writer-director Netta Shaler of the short film Sparks, which is part of aGliff's fiction shorts lineup number 2. Shaler, Netta, sorry. First of all, congratulations on a compelling film about one family's turmoil after the loss of a son to the AIDS crisis sometime in the early 90s. So sometimes these stories can spring from the filmmaker's personal experiences. Can you tell us if that may be the case here, or if not, maybe how the story came about?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm a bit excited, as you might hear.
Yeah.
Grief was part of my life. I lost my mother when I was 10 years old. And ever since, it's a theme that I'm dealing with in my creation, in my life in general. And also being queer is one of my biggest theme of life. So I wanted to bring this emotion, this theme, but as a different story. I didn't lose my mother from AIDS or anything like that, of course. But I wanted to have these stories about grief.
Netta, one of the things that struck me so much about your film was just the amount of sincerity that each one of the actors had to bring to their roles. I think that it's interesting to me because every single one of these characters is dealing with both the loss and the love of this other character who, aside from a few moments, we don't really see them on screen, but they all have to make us feel this real connection to this absence in the house. And I think that works so well, of course, because of the script, but also because of those performances. Can you talk a little bit about assembling that really, really wonderful cast, like what you were looking for and how you got it?
Yeah, sure. So it was a long process, auditioning and having match, and eventually created this family. We started, of course, with Amits, the hero of the movie. I had a clear vision of who I wanted him to be. And the actor, Jordan, came, I think, the second one to audition. And I knew he was the one when I first saw him. But still, we got a lot of processing and matching. And then I had something about 2 months of rehearsals. We met maybe once a week, all 5 of us, me and the 4 actors. And we rehearsed a lot, talking about the themes. One example, after I wrote the script, I found out there was a person that his story really similar to Daniel's story. He had a lover who died of AIDS, and he was the first one to connect that to drug and to have drug show with the contact of AIDS in some way. And I didn't know this person before. So when I found out about him, I invited him to have a conversation with the cast and to learn more deeply about the emotions and the time. Obviously, it's a historical time. So it was a really deep process.
Yeah, you talk about the deep emotions of these characters, and in the story, Amit has some shockingly homophobic outbursts, right? And while we understand that much of it may be driven out, obviously, by his grief over losing his brother and maybe being disconnected as well, how prevalent is this sort of homophobia in Israeli culture, and both then and today?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an interesting question because I had a few teachers that suggested me to not have the story in the 90s and do it right here, right now. And sometimes we were arguing. I thought that now we processed ever since, and some people felt that we hadn't processed enough. Of course, it's never enough. So I think back then in the 90s, it was more a homophobic culture, and people in Israel were like the 90s is the midpoint of the LGBT community, the revolutionary decade that we started to have parades and declare rights. So things have changed ever since, but fortunately there are still people here and everywhere, sadly, that feel yeah.
Yeah, I want to speak a little bit more about the brother Amit's sort of the journey that he goes on in this film, because Jim, you're right, there are these moments of these like large outbursts that really show what he's going through, but even earlier in the film we have sort of like a delayed reaction in seeing the full scope of what he's thinking. And I think that was really interesting to me. He shows up with a chip on his shoulder, definitely, but we have to sort of process in real time, like, okay, what's the relationship between these people? What happened? How did this happen? And I think that it really, the moment that really pinpointed exactly where his discomfort with everything came from was the butter and the knife as they're having breakfast, as he's putting everything together and projecting a lot onto the character of Daniel and the family's reactions. All of that takes a lot of pacing, I think, to set that up in a specific way instead of just having him barge through the door screaming. Can you talk a little bit about developing that pacing out so that Amit becomes as relatable as he does, even though he has such kind of vile thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this scene, I chose to show it in the POV of Amit. I decided to bring the camera closer and closer to him, and as we saw his point of view, it's also in slow motion because this is how he feels. He's not in the reality yet, and this is one of the sorry.
It's okay.
Also, I think it was important to me to have scenes that he's alone and to see his is urine to Yoni, to his brother. So there is a difference how he acts when he's alone and how he acts when he is with his family and with other people. I think this is the way that the audience can connect to him and to his feeling, because they see it's deeper than just anger and just homophobia.
Yeah, very good, very good. I noticed there was one, there's a very poignant scene near the end where everyone who's celebrating the life of Yoni is given sugar cubes to eat in some remembrance and celebration of his life. Could you tell us more about that? Is that a particular custom or that maybe some of us are not familiar with?
Actually, it's an idea that it wasn't my original idea. I was participate in a drag show of the memory of someone. Her name was Danveg. She was a transgender woman in the queer community who fortunately killed herself. And the community, the queer community here in Tel Aviv had show in her memory. And her friends did the exactly same thing. And they went to the audience and gave them the sugar cube, as they say, to take the medicine, go down with something sweet.
Ah.
And this moment as a audience in this show was so powerful. It was also one of my first moments in the queer community. And I felt really, really connected to the other people through that moment. And I decided to take it as a heritage to her. If someone, maybe some Israeli audience will understand the connection. And also, it's really a cute idea.
It's a wonderful idea. Such a great expression, and something I may, who knows, maybe I may remember it later on and steal it from you a little bit. But thank you for sharing your insights into a wonderful film. Thank you. And unfortunately, I think we have to move on to the next film. But first, a reminder that Sparks, the short film, Netta's film, is part of the Fiction Shorts lineup #2. So if you're looking at your event listing and your film listing, that's where to find it. You should definitely search it out. Now I'd like to turn our attention to the film Vincy, which is paired with the documentary feature Out Loud in the program. Joining us from Vincy is both director Sophia Shek and Vincy. First of all, congratulations on such a really impactful portrait of Vincy, an artist that I admit I was not familiar with, but gladly am now, thanks to your film. Can you tell us about how this project was formed and got started?
So
I'll throw that out to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a part of a collaboration with the West Kowloon Cultural District in Hong Kong. So it's this park museum area. So they put on a lot of free outdoor shows every month, like 6 months of the year, and they do try to promote a lot of local artists. So for this project, it was a part of a compilation album that they did for 6 local artists, and they wanted to pair us with 6 video artists to interpret our songs. So some of us did like a dance video, some of them were animation, and we decided to go with this kind of short documentary format. And the person that was interviewing me was 2 of my very close friends, so you do hear a lot of like personal perspectives coming out in the documentary.
Good.
That was how the project came about.
Yes. That's so wonderful. And I want to turn the question over to Sophia, because I think that what was so interesting to me is that, honestly, Vincy is very, very, very fascinating. You could just put a camera in front of Vincy can talk, and that's a film. But one of the things that I liked about what you did with this was you added some stylistic elements on top of that I think helped support the telling of the story. For example, there's a box that is around Vincy that sort of bounces between like pinks and blues, and I thought that was especially interesting as the conversations about sex, gender, and race all serving as disruptions of status quo, sort of disrupting the box. I thought that was very, very compelling and very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the stylistic elements that you chose and why you put them in the way that you did?
My co-director Hugo Kenzo unfortunately couldn't be here, but we always planned it to be black and white, and we wanted to slowly bring in colors. And so somehow we incorporated the box to kind of bring in the spectrum, of our LGBTQ community. And so as you get to know Vincy a wee bit more, we felt that the audience gets to know Vincy and who they are a little bit more. So we didn't intentionally did it for any particular reason, except for styling wise, we've seen it being done before. We always thought it was going to just be in the color grading of the film, but after putting it into the box, it turned out pretty cool, and we just ran with it. So I would say it was a little trial and error in the post-production side. We didn't intentionally, put it down in paper and presented it that way. It just kind of stylistically came together in post-production.
Very good. And Vincy is obviously front and center in this film, and we're learning about their views on love, being queer, cultural and racial identity, which was all fascinating from her perspective. And we talked a little bit about the style of the film. Can you tell us, maybe from Vincy or from Sophia, how much being an artist themselves, how much creative input Vincy had in influencing the documentary style of the film?
Vincy, do you want to go first?
I think it was very much a experimental process. Sophia actually picked up the project halfway because a videographer that I was supposed to work with had dropped out due to his schedule. So it was sort of very last minute, and we decided that this is something that we'll try. And to follow up on your question about the editing, I didn't actually see how it was edited until Hugo did it, and we just kind of ran with it. So I think it was all a very, I would say, organic process of making that film. And in coming up with the questions even that I was asked, or what we were going to talk about, we kind of just decided to have two of my really close friends come in. Both of them are queer, to see what happens. That is the kind of topics that we talk about in daily conversation anyway. So it was just interesting, I think, to have that captured on film. None of that was scripted, and I think we spent maybe 2 hours, like the talking. I did like 2 hours of talking to cut down to what it is now, but I think all of that came out really naturally.
I mean, part of me would love to see the super extended cut of that too, because I'm sure that's fascinating as well. But I think what was so interesting to me about this, aside from the stylistic elements, I think that a lot of the conversations that you have are both very personal, but also I think very there's like nuggets of wisdom that I think audience members can take away, from the talk about there is a need both to kind of live out loud and proud, but also there is a need to make space for people who within the queer community who have to live quietly, whether it be because that's where they're at on their journey, or because for many trans people it is very dangerous in certain parts of the world to live out and proud. But there was also this concept of prototype that was really, really interesting to me. Can you talk a little bit about the prototype, like philosophy and brand? Because it was a neat little portmanteau for me.
Again, that was linked to the West Kowloon project. So I had been invited to perform there when I first came back to Hong Kong from the US after I graduated from college, and I needed, I obviously needed a band to play with. And before the performance, I was like, oh, I should probably like put something together, just like for the name of the band. And that was really how it came about. And again, like I said in the film, so many people asked me if it was because of it was like a wordplay on the word dyke, and it was like, funny, but no.
It's interesting that people are able to sort of apply themselves, like almost put themselves onto a label like that and sort of find something in it, even if it wasn't intentional.
I do find that really interesting, because I think the conversation about queerness and the kind of queer coding that we do out here in Hong Kong and Asia in general is very, very different from Europe, America. And so when people look at me, I think, especially when I'm not wearing a whole amount of makeup, I think people assume that, I'm sort of what you guys would call like butch, or maybe a tomboy. That's kind of how people would see me. And so for people to look at me or my work, or the name of my band, and just come to me with these associations, was, I think, an interesting social experiment to me as well.
Yeah.
It is very interesting, and thank you for sharing that insight. I learned so much, and now I've been Googling you and finding stuff to read. So it's opened up a world for me. So thank you.
Thank you.
And don't forget, everyone, you can find Sophia and Vincy's film Vincy paired with the documentary Out Loud. It's in the aGliff event listing. So definitely go and check that out. Now, and last but not least, we're going to talk with Shivin and Sunny Grover, writers and directors of short film The Lonely Prince, which is part of the fiction short films lineup, number 1. Congratulations on what struck me as a queer romance story with a twist, but told with such a heightened and striking visual style. Can you tell us the inspiration and ideas that went into the stylistic look and feeling for this film?
It's all started off as trying to create a new myth that we could pass off, from generations. The idea was to have a historical story that might or might not have existed, because especially in Indian culture, we don't have stories that were told back in the decades, or 15th, 16th centuries about queer characters or queer individuals. So that was where we started off. We were okay, let's create something that we can one day tell the next generation that kind of comes to us and can be passed on in the Indian queer community, and now spreading it across the world. And the visual style of it, first of all, is very influenced by India itself and Bollywood, heavily taking it into a little more subtle way, even though it is still so extravagant. Because it's not completely Bollywood, it's not completely, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Where we kind of find ourselves as creators right now, as filmmakers. That's where we are. We're trying to find the balance in it. So that's where the visual style, came from. And as directors, as writers, we write with the end goal of visualizing. That's our point. We write scenes based on how it'll look, how it'll feel, what the emotional journey is going to be like. So style itself plays a very, very important part in our work. And that's how this kind of just came together.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
It's interesting you mentioned style, because one of the things that I found most interesting about the film, especially in the early parts of it, we have these I guess I'll call them dream sequences, little cut asides, which use a lot of interesting jump cuts and match cuts to really pull you through them in a way that is both disorienting but also a little bit intoxicating. And I thought that was a really interesting and solid inclusion there. Can you talk a little bit about writing those sequences, did you visualize them that way on script, or did you visualize them that way on set, or did you visualize them that way in the editing bay, or all of the above? How did that work out?
I think when it comes to writing story, especially for us, we kind of like this narrative style where not everything is explained at once, where you leave room for the audience to make up their own story in between the beats that you're giving. So when it came to like doing the dream sequences or just doing like the scenes with our main character, that's what we wanted to feel, is that to have like an expression on his face that you might think, is he happy, is he sad, is he angry, is he lonely, to just kind of help the audience itself connect the dots. And speaking about the dream sequences, like there's a specific one where the love interest Angelo is like bathing with a pot, like an earthen pot in the middle of a desert. This is kind of like an homage to like old Indian Bollywood movies where the girl would like have to bathe in like a waterfall or something like that because of the censorship, where you couldn't show too much. So you would leave it up to the audience to make suggestions. So that was like, what if we did this but with a man, and we show how our main character is so attractive that he's making his own kind of interpretation of what he thinks his love would look like. So that was like one of the main like scene that came in our head, is like, we need to do this scene, let's figure out how do we put this in. So that's how we wrote it.
Definitely a different twist on the sexy scene for Bollywood films anyway, which I really like. And by the way, I hope that I can get in touch with you later, because I want to use you as a reference for some Bollywood films that I need to watch. But I do adore films like this one that choose to tell their stories through, and you talked about this, through visual gestures and kind of wordless character interactions. And in these types of films, music often plays a major part. And you mentioned this is not full Bollywood with like the huge, singing and dancing scenes. But I think the music plays a really strong part of The Lonely Prince. Can you tell us about the music of this film?
So when we met with our music composer, who is like a head to toe Bollywood guy, so this is his first not Bollywood project. So
right.
It was like we very specifically went to him hoping that he can add that Indian essence to it, give it the ground it in a very folklore kind of world, where he's using Indian instruments and complementing them with like European orchestras, because that's what kind of like was important to us. It was an Indian prince falling in love with a European artist. So that itself was a confluence of worlds, of cultures, of different like instrumentations that kind of came together to create The Lonely Prince. And like you said, there isn't much dialogue in the entire film, like 8 lines in the entire thing. So having music drive the emotional graph, or like to constantly reinforce or to juxtapose what was happening was key. And also because we were scared, because it's a slow film. It's a little like, we're giving you time as an audience member to take in what's happening before it picks up and all goes away. We wanted the music itself to guide you through that process, to guide you to what we intended to make you feel, or what we as filmmakers felt while writing and creating this.
And the main thing was that our composer, Meghdeep Bose, he told us that you gave me a really, really difficult task because I have to make the music talk. And I found that very, very interesting, and something that I'm going to take along with my journey is that, dialogue doesn't talk. Everything talks in a film. The images talk, the music talks, the colors talk. And this is very special to us.
One of the other things that was really interesting about this film, as much as I enjoyed the story of the romance and the desire and the want with the prince and the artist, there were also a bunch of very, very interesting women that surrounded the life of the prince himself, from his guards and his retinue to people who maybe desired him, all these different characters. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of crafting those characters as as well, and like you said, 8 lines of dialogue. You have to get all of that across with, you know, visuals only. You can't just like come out on screen and tell us who everyone is. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of getting those women in those specific roles?
Women in all our work have played a very, very important part, from like our first project right up into this. We as like human beings have been molded by women, whether it be our mothers or our mentors. We've constantly had women guiding us, so our work talks very strongly with feminism and giving power to the allies itself, in a way, because that was important to us. We didn't want him to completely be, you know, beaten by everyone in the world. We wanted him to be supported by someone in this thing. And the idea of having like female guards around him was a sort of punishment for him. It was intended as a way, like, as a heterosexual man, being surrounded by women would be your dream. But as a homosexual man, where do you go if you are restricted from just exploring your sexuality or your identity? How are you restricted? Where does your mind linger then? And how does that play on your own psychology and your consciousness?
Right.
And it was important. Like, out of 5 of the women characters, one of them is homophobic, or is unable to understand where he's coming from. And does what she thinks is right, is like calling the guards or calling the army in the end, which again is what she seems best for the person she cares about the most, or is appointed to protect the most. Again, that's a conversation that we wanted to strike, we wanted to like initiate, and hopefully, you know, have with people, like what she did, was it right, was it wrong, who is where in this story. But yeah, women play a very, very important part in all of our work, and especially this one where he's supported constantly by his main guard, or is allowed to be himself, knowing that there is someone to catch him if he falls.
Right, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I mean, in all cultures, I have, you know, I have other friends who relate the story of growing up, you know, gay, but in kind of a female family. You know, a lot of the females play prominently in their, you know, the formation as they're growing up. So it was great to see that kind of reflected in this film. In the film, the film ends with the Lonely Prince and is it Alexander, the sculptor, running off into the sunset together, and he's leaving behind this life of, you know, torment and loneliness. So in the universe of this film, can you tell us what you, as the writers, imagine will follow for them as their story continues?
It's not going to be happy immediately. I think they have a lot more obstacles to go over,
Right.
but it's definitely, I think, opening for them. It's definitely gonna. I think it's a happy ending, and we don't usually do happy endings. Originally, like a very, very like sad, cathartic film, and we read this and we're like, okay, if a homosexual would watch this movie, is that what you want to give the audience? That, you know, it doesn't get better. No, we want to end it with like, you have to go through everything to learn who you are, and then eventually things will get better.
Well, I that's exactly what comes across in the film to me. Maybe we'll get a part 2. I don't know. We'll see that later on, if there's any interest in that from you guys. So thank you both, and thank you all for joining us. As we look to wrap up, I'd like to remind everyone that all of these amazing films can be found as part of the aGliff 33 Prism lineup. So check the event schedule on the aGliff website for those details of how you can get to see those films. You can also catch us talking to more filmmakers throughout the festival on our Movie Bears podcast breaks. And don't forget to check out moviebearspodcast.com for more film reviews that we do from the bear perspective, all types of films. So on behalf of the Movie Bears podcast and aGliff, we'd like to thank each of our guests today especially. We'd also like to thank all of you who are watching and listening at home for supporting the festival. Take care, everybody.